First off, thanks. I'm not used to using the microphone, so if you have any problems, just raise your hand and tell me to speak up, okay? The one thing that I've learned since I've been back, and I've seen Carl McVeigh get in front of lots of crowds, is that you always compliment your wife first and foremost. So the first thing I'm going to say is, my wife, I am the luckiest man in the world because she is a better person. She's way too attractive for me, and she's my best friend, my closest confidant, advisor, and honestly, I go to her for everything. In fact, she probably picked out this outfit that I'm wearing right now. That's how dependent I am on her. As Chris said, I'm born and raised right here in Carmi, and I graduated high school in 2001, went to Murray State, political science degree. I actually started out law school at John Marshall, which is Judge Stanley's alma mater. Wanted to try something different, but once I got up there, I realized that Southern Illinois is the place for me. So I transferred back to SIU and graduated in 08. And he's right. I came back here and started a practice. Most of my classmates were out applying for jobs, and I was trying to think earlier if I've ever even applied for a job, and the only two times I could think of was one was to be a park boy for the city of Carmi, and the other one was to be a telemarketer while in college. And what's kind of strange about that is I get up and speak in front of people for a living now, and the only thing for that interview was to say a line, and I bombed it. Like, how do you do that? But after speaking mostly with Judge Stanley a lot, I decided to come back here and start a practice. I can't say enough about Mark Stanley because as far as mentors, kind of father figures, he's the one who got me going, so to speak. I used to basically bother him all the time, asking him questions and finding out different answers. How do you do this? How do you do that? And he was gracious and nice enough to kind of take me under his wing there for the longest time and help me out a lot. And then as far as the second mentor that I've had is the other judge, so is T. Scott Webb. And as soon as I got into the practice here, after a little while, he asked me to come and be his assistant. Really took me under his wing as well. So I've been extremely blessed to have two really top-of-the-line mentors. And then Greg Stewart and Mike Drone, I see I passed the Greg Stewart test because he usually leaves before the speaker starts. But I do think he is on his iPhone or something. So. But these guys, they're great as well. I mean, we have a really good community attorneys here. These guys, both of those two, I could call them up whenever I had my private practice. And as long as it wasn't something they were on the other side of, they would definitely help me out and help me out as much as they could. So I've been very blessed as far as my career to be here in Carmi. So, as most of you know, if you've been keeping track with the news, I spent the last week and a half stuck in a jury trial that ended with a hung jury. Mistrial means that it couldn't come to a decision. And whenever I agreed to speak here, I thought that jury trial would be concluded with a result. So that took about half of my material out. But the way I was talking with Alex about it is, I guess technically I'm 0, 0, and 1 right now as far as jury trials go, so that's not too bad. Basically, since that occurred, like I said, I basically tried to come this morning and try to write down a few things that I could throw together. So all this is pretty hodgepodge and thrown together. That's why. As far as what's a state's attorney? You know, what's this guy do anyway? Last month I went up to Springfield for the state's attorney's training, and it was a week-long horrible event where they told me the hundreds of duties that Scott Webb failed to mention that I have to do. In fact, they even put together a big old binder that tells you everything you're supposed to do. So most people think chief law enforcement officer, and that's pretty accurate. I deal with the police, that being the local, the sheriff's department, state police, as far as how to handle issues in regards that are criminal violations. And so that's a pretty accurate title, and that's what most people think. But I actually have a lot of other responsibilities too. Every county board meeting, I've got to be there. I'm the county board advisor, and that is interesting. Luckily, we have a very good county board. As far as some counties, they're not so lucky. When I was up in Springfield, one guy who just got in was telling me about how out of 11 county board members, 9 of them were suing the county at that time. I thought, wow, what were you thinking, man? Should have waited till next term to run. But we're very lucky to have a good county board here. And again, with the law enforcement, we're very, very lucky to have great men and women in those positions. As far as other duties and responsibilities, just a few that I jotted down. I'm the FOIA officer, so the Freedom of Information Act. Every single time someone wants to know about some piece of information, everyone in the county offices, they bring it right over to my office. So whenever I'm in the middle of something, here you go. Tell us what to do about this. So that's just one of those many, many things that I've got to be prepared for. Basically, as the county's attorney, I advise the county board, I represent the county. Property tax assessment disputes can arise, election violations I have to be ready for. A big one, and this is one I kind of really took over whenever I was the assistant, and was in regards to child abuse and like termination of parental rights. That's a big role for the state's attorney. Whenever DCFS gets involved in a case, they'll bring it over to us, and then we kind of have to make a decision whether or not to step in and have the court monitor that. So, as I said, the main thing that most people think about is Chief Law Enforcement Officer. I prosecute. If someone breaks the law, it's me who decides whether or not they broke the law and whether or not to try to convict them and take it in front of people like Judge Stanley. And whenever you look at the different rules that govern these kinds of things, the one that stands out to me always is Illinois Supreme Court Rule 3.8, and it speaks of the duties of a public prosecutor. And it says, the duty of a public prosecutor is to seek justice, not merely to convict. And I'd say that's the guiding principle as far as the way I try to run my office and my administration. It's not about numbers, and it's not about trying to send someone to prison or anything like that. It's about justice, about making things right. So, how does it come about that you see all these people that I charge? Or the ones that you see, at least in the paper, where they've been charged? And my general process of instituting an action, criminal action, is I receive reports from the various law enforcement agencies, and I'll review those to make a decision. And I always sit there, and as I go through them, I ask myself 3 questions. First, do I believe this person is guilty of a crime? Do I believe that in my heart and head that this person did something wrong? If so, then I move on to the next one. If not, then this report gets moved over. The next one is, do I believe I can prove it? Because if I can't prove it, and it's a minor offense that nothing can be done about it, all I'm doing is wasting people's time and taxpayer money whenever it's something that cannot be solved. But if I can, if I feel in my heart that I can prove it, then I ask my 3rd question. That's, do I believe justice would be served by seeking a conviction of this person under these circumstances? If yeah, then that's when we move on. Now, last month we saw I'm assuming that a lot of you guys saw that I actually called a grand jury. The way that I institute criminal charges is either I file what's called an information, which is basically just a charging document that I sign saying that so-and-so committed a crime. And then if it's a felony, the judge has to determine if there's probable cause for that. But another way is to call a grand jury and ask for them to return bills of indictment. And that's basically where you get citizens to decide whether or not they believe these charges should be brought. And I think it's a useful tool because it gives me a feel for whether or not people want certain offenses charged and how they want them handled. So it's another way of charging, and I think it's, again, I think it's a very useful technique as far as getting the community involved with it. Now, one thing I hear a lot, and I know this is going to shock a lot of you, that I get lied to. It's surprising, isn't it? But even some, they'll say, well, this isn't right. This shouldn't even be against the law. And I say, you know what? Sometimes I say, you're right. It probably shouldn't be. But guess what? I'm not David Rice and I'm not Dale Ryder. So if you want to complain about the law, you need to go talk to them. My job is merely to enforce it. We get some interesting characters, as you can imagine, who it never fails to amaze me. That's for sure. But that's usually the one issue that I always find interesting, because I have a lot of discretion in handling my job and doing what I do. But I think it would be completely improper for me to decide what is the law and isn't the law. I wasn't elected to do that. That's why we have elected lawmakers to make the law. My job is merely to enforce it and use my discretion in how I think it's appropriate. So that kind of brings me to, as far as my decisions in regards to plea agreements and things of that nature. And usually what I'm looking at is the severity of the offense, whether it's a crime that involves a victim or not, and what kind of damage was done to this victim, the person, his or her criminal history, whether or not they've shown an inability to conform to society's standards, and really that person and their dependents and family, those things all play into how we try to negotiate something. Now, I said it's not a numbers game, but to fill some time, because like I said, part of my material got booted out on Monday. I had Kelly Fulkerson, our circuit clerk, run some numbers, and honestly, I don't know if they really mean anything, because I'm not really sure what the past numbers are. So here's some numbers for you, though. Since I've been in office, I have filed 30 felonies. I think a third of those would be associated with that grand jury. 55 misdemeanors, 15 DUIs, 16 juvenile abuse or neglect cases, and 32 juvenile delinquency cases. Now, looking at the breakdown of those, a lot of the felonies can be associated with drug violations. The way our laws are written is, it's generally, if you get caught with drugs, it's usually a pretty severe offense, or at least a severe classification. And as far as the misdemeanors, the majority of those are violent offenses. And I think that's interesting that violent offenses take up the misdemeanors, while drug offenses take up the felonies. And of course, there's obviously the property offenses and obstruction offenses and things of that nature. So, what other issues are there? Right now, everyone's been paying attention to concealed carry and what's going on with that. Judge Staley and I have had this discussion where we find it's interesting that the Federal Appeals Court has declared a law unconstitutional, yet stayed at 6 months. Not sure how it can still be constitutional if it's unconstitutional. But that's what they tell us that is going to happen, and that's what they tell us to do, so that's, I guess, what we do. I think it's interesting to see what's going on with concealed carry, and I'm actually very happy that Illinois is getting on board with that, because I don't like to talk about all my personal feelings. Again, I ran unopposed last time, so I didn't have to show all my cards yet, but you know, one thing is that violent offenses should not be tolerated, is my opinion. Violent offenses and property offenses really strike me as wrong. Sorry. They are morally wrong to me. So, looking at possible punishments that we have been creating towards nonviolent offenders, Right now we are instituting drug court in our circuit, and there's also a new program called the Offender Initiative Program, which I just learned about, which is they're both very stringent for people who are nonviolent offenders. And it's a way of, and you've heard about how overcrowded our prison is, our prisons are, a way of trying to avoid getting any more nonviolent offenders locked up and try to get them rehabilitated and back into society where they can be productive citizens. Let's see here, I've made it 17 minutes, and so, since I knew I would probably be running out of time and material here, I went ahead and grabbed the court reporter's few of her greatest hits. So I figured I'd read those and you guys could decide whether or not they're good or not. Okay, this one is good actually. All right, this guy.
Ben?
Yes.
Tell them how those are kept.
Well, our court reporter, Mary Marcus, she's our regular court reporter, and as these events unfold in court, she'll write them down and then on her pieces of paper, and then we keep them in the courtroom. And I stole them today. Or I'm sorry, I didn't say that. I borrowed them today. This guy, he was an interesting one. He was whenever someone gets charged with a crime, they get brought in, and the judge tells them, this is what you're charged with, these are the possible penalties, do you understand your charges, do you want an attorney? This guy had been advised of his drug conspiracy charge multiple times. Do you understand what it is that the state says that you do, sir? Nope, don't understand it. Finally, he says, is it like someone saying that I'm pregnant, but I'm not? And Judge Sutton says, that's it exactly. I hope this one's appropriate. Another individual, and I'm doing my best to leave out their names because these are some regulars, but he's in for a first advisement. He's sitting in the first row on the right side with his girlfriend. Judge Stanley tells Officer Marsh that they're getting pretty lovey-dovey outside. Officer Marsh observes them with her legs over his in the pew, and Officer Marsh advises, so-and-so, this is a courtroom, not the back seat of your car. That was just too mean. This person was being advised of his case, and the judge asked him if he knew, and he goes, yep, I'm doomed. Oh man. For those who know Jerry Kreisel, he is our public defender, and a public defender does not have the most enviable of jobs. He will get ran over by defendants and everyone else. So this person was asked, did you have an attorney in your other case? Nope, I had Mr. Kreisel. All right, this is a Judge Stanley one here. Defendant's in for playing loud music. And Judge Stanley says to him, he's wearing a Pink Floyd shirt, and he says, you weren't playing Pink Floyd, were you? That just can't be a crime. A couple of defendants, they were sitting in the jury box waiting to be advised, and one of them looks at the other one and says, by the time I get out of prison, Scott Webb will be judge. That's from back in 2011. This one's directed by Judge Sutton to Kevin Kirkendall, and I don't mind throwing out his name to you guys. His cell phone went off during court, and the judge said, what do you have other than a bad ringtone? Oh man, this is one involving me. This was embarrassing. Okay, we were in the middle of a juvenile hearing, which is a closed proceeding, and this woman came in, and she was wearing a t-shirt that said, how do you keep an idiot busy? It's great. So she walks in while we're going through this hearing, and the judge is like, "What are you doing? You can't be in here, get out." And she goes, "All right, Mr. Aud, you've got my number, just give me a call." To which another attorney says, "You get that all the time, don't you, Denton?" Well, this one's good too. This defendant comes to court drunk. Again, that's, I know, very shocking, very surprising, right? The judge says, "Why are you drunk?" The defendant says, "I'm an alcoholic." Again, you know, it's very humbling being the White County State's Attorney. It's a position that I have nothing but respect for. I know that it's the position itself, not necessarily the occupant of the office. I've tried to keep an open door policy, which means that I encourage everyone who wants to come in and talk to me, concerns, criticisms, anything. I encourage that. I think it's important for you to be able to come and talk to me. Like I said, you know, it's been a pleasure, and I've only been doing it for 3 months, so I haven't lost the rest of my hair yet, but I'm getting there. But again, if I can ever be of any assistance to anyone, do not hesitate to call. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to serve you. Thank you.